your experience in the military, and I wanted to kind of talk about your time in the U.S. Army. How did that experience, including any challenges you faced as a Vietnamese American, shape your approach to entrepreneurship and talent acquisition?
The Army was really fun for me. There were a lot of challenges. I joined as a reservist in 2004. I had the option of being either a chef, watercraft engineer, which was essentially a mechanic, for these Army vessels that are like 174 feet in length. Time in the Army taught me how to be like a hands-on carpenter and just kind of general contractor. What kind of impacted me the most, what I learned that I still utilize to this day, is some of the processes that the Army has in play. And people don't think of the military, and I'll just, I guess, just speak on the Army because that's where I was at, as like a data-driven organization. But man, they are airtight with the requirements that we have to kind of uphold. Right? And I'm not talking about like a discipline. It's like the schools and the documentation and the records you have to upkeep. Those are tracked by the Army and says, hey, you're 30 days late, or you're early, or get this done by this date. And we just have to get it done. And they use all that information to really create what they call a horse blanket in terms of the next year's planning for how the Army's going to operate. And if you break it down from like big Army to general corps and divisions and battalions and so on and so forth, you now have the structure of a tech company. Right? And throughout all these layers, what they taught us was essentially, and this is a carpentry term too, like a measure twice, cut once, or slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And that what that really means is understand the foundational aspects of your job, get really good at that, and now you can kind of do that without blinking. Once you move, you now become an expert at that craft, right? You can continue to do that work in any environment, understand some of the edge cases. And the Army had this process of where, even in downtime, you're always checking on your readiness. And there's a term called PMCS, Preventative Maintenance Checks and Services, and there's PMCS and inspections or whatever. Even when there wasn't any work to do, we'd always maintain our systems, our equipment, and ensure they were able to be utilized at any given moment. We also did it on ourselves, our physical fitness. We're always checking in on that. We're checking in on our accomplishments and our personal growth. That's all documented. During training missions, there's a pre-planning phase to assess the risk of the likelihood of a trainee being injured or dehydrating, or if there's overcast, what's the likelihood of lightning striking this facility? That's all like pre-planned and prepared and in the entire report before the commander can execute on a training plan. And then even after the training is done and no one gets hurt or injured and things don't go by the wayside, there's what we call a hot wash, is essentially a retrospective, right, in the product world, which is like a mini retro. And then there's like a formal retro, which is called an AAR, after action review, where you actually document what went well, what didn't go well, changes that need to be made, who's responsible. And what does that sound like a retrospective, right? So when I got into tech, I was like, wow, this sounds all so familiar. It's just not as like stiff. You're not having to sit in a row with all your soldiers and have all your gear on and wait for your turn to talk. In tech is essentially that's happening so rapidly. And I think if we can hone in on that, I think there'll be a much better outcome. So the Army taught me that. And I think it's fascinating how us as humans, if we can operate in that type of mindset and within those parameters, get a lot more done, and a lot more folks would be happy about just the process of everything within startups. Funny story about being a Vietnamese American. I grew up, in the Bay Area, pretty diverse. Everyone's kind of the same. Yeah. Didn't really have any issues. Made a lot of friends, but I will share my story in basic training to where, arriving at Fort Jackson, South Carolina in 2004, July 19th, you meet people from all over across the U.S. and U.S. territories. So when we got there, we were able to kind of have downtime to chat with each other in line or like after the days like onboarding is done. You figure out there's people from places I've never been. So I grew up in Hayward, never really left until I joined the Army, and then I met folks from like Idaho, Iowa, Texas, American Samoa, in the Bay Area, Wyoming. And there were folks that actually haven't been out of their town and seen a person of my skin color, right? Brown, or haven't met anyone from San Francisco. And the first thing they asked me was, hey, where are you from? I'm like, hey, I'm from the Bay Area. What do you mean by that? Like, oh, San Francisco, Oakland, Hayward. He goes, oh, so are you gay? And I was like, you got to be fucking kidding me, man. He goes, no, man, from what I hear, like everyone from San Francisco is gay. And that was my first interaction with someone who wasn't from the Bay Area that grew up in a small town. And they weren't trying to be offensive. That's just all they knew. So that was my experience, not even as a Vietnamese American, but someone from the Bay Area joining the military. Long story short, it went even as far as like they nicknamed me Hollywood because some of the folks thought that the only thing in California was Hollywood. Like the disconnect there was pretty huge. Didn't really have an issue being Vietnamese American. I think I was able to, just get along with everyone. I was always thinking about how to do things better, which might have been positive impact, but it could have been totally different. But yeah, great experience overall, and I share that story just out of it's tongue in cheek, right? It was such a surprise to me, but I really enjoyed my time in the service.
Everybody has a different perception of a place that, they've never been to. It's the easiest, most accessible thing to kind of attach to. Now, whether people wholeheartedly believe in it and feel very strongly about it, I think that's a whole different story. But I think it's very natural for people to have preconceptions. I don't know if they actually believed it or they were just kind of joking around about it as just like a common culture kind of understanding within those circles.
Yeah, 100%, man. Absolutely.
What were the top leadership traits that you took away from your time at the Army?
Yeah, I want to say lead by example. That was kind of ingrained in us, whether you were a sergeant or in a leadership position or not. And I think what that meant to me was, just doing the right thing. Like even when you're tired, for me, it felt good to always like not be on someone's radar. It was actually a stress reliever to do the right thing. If I had to show up and run 4 miles, even after a late night of, hanging out at the club, showing up and doing that actually reduced the amount of stress that I, would hold if I didn't show up and do that. And that might not be the best example, but when I think of the Army and the leadership principles, it really is leading from the front. And I had a sergeant that I met during deployment, and I wasn't the best soldier coming in. I was really lackadaisical. Like I did my things. I wasn't like the most high speed, or I always just try to find a way to have fun. This gentleman was a former Marine. In our first engagement, I remember pinning a new rank on myself because that's what was given to me by the staff because I spent X amount of time on the reserves and basic training. I just didn't know what the ceremonial procedures were to make that new rank. So I went into the bathroom, put that rank on, came back out. I said, "Hey, Private No, who authorized you to put that rank on?" I'm like, "Oh, well, it was given to me by this individual. They said I was promoted, so I figured this was the right thing to do." And I was 20 years old at the time. This gentleman was, I think, in his 40s, or almost in his 40s, close to his 40s. And rather than like yelling at me and scolding me then and there for that mistake I made, he very well could have. He pulled me aside and said, "Hey, look, I know you're fresh out of boot camp. This is the reserves. But typically when you get a new rank, there's a ceremony involved." And he didn't say it like that, all nice and stuff. He was actually pretty like stern about it. He didn't yell at me, like he didn't scold me, but he was serious. And I was like, damn it, I'm gonna spend a year with this guy. He's so like strict, he's so like not fun. But the next day before we stepped out for like training, they put a ceremony on for me. And I was like, wow, this is pretty special. Thanks, man. Like, so for him to like not be the ideal leader for me in my mind at the time, he actually became the best leader that I had because day in and day out, he made sure that I was given the right training, the right environment, the right set of requirements to succeed. And I didn't know it at the time. I just thought like, hey, the Army's fun. I made it past boot camp. Let me just, this is easy. But he put things in front of me that challenged me, helped me become a faster runner to the gym with me, helped me increase my strength, agility, and like just endurance. Really taught me through all of experience in the Marine Corps and in the Army, what to expect. So when I say like lead from the front, he really just kept me and my health and wellness and my career at the forefront of his mind to ensure that when I run into these challenges, I was prepared, adjust fire, so to speak, or pivot in tech terms and continue moving forward. So that can show up in many different ways, whether it's being a great speaker or platoon your squad but for him, his style of leadership was just straightforward. Over time, obviously, we built a relationship over the year, and I got him to laugh once in a while and smile and stuff like that. But I still think of him to this day. And I think he embodied everything that I learned in the military. Was essentially, regardless of what is on his plate, right? Because I wasn't his only soldier. He had a few more. He made sure that I did well, and that helped me kind of be where I'm at today. Whether I still utilize those principles or not, I think it's kind of ingrained in me. 20 years later.
When people are younger, right, I think it's always important to have mentors that are much older and have seen a lot more things than they have, right? I think a lot of times people kind of only have friend groups or connections that are only within their specific age group, and I think sometimes it becomes kind of a bubble in terms of or an echo chamber. So I think having kind of a positive male role model, whether they're strict or just generally have your best intentions at heart, I think those are really important personal and also even career building connections to have.
No, absolutely. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
What was the biggest learning curve transitioning from the military to civilian corporate life as a technical recruiter?
The biggest gap was, this is going to sound really funny, but just not being so professional. I still had it in me to say please and thank you and just be incredibly proper. And I realized quickly at Crunchyroll that wasn't the vibe, like I could just relax a little bit. So I think having that always on professionalism was hard to shake. And to this day, sometimes I still find myself talking to my kids like that, just out of nowhere, like I'm not standing attention, but like whatever the term is. But my son and I now, he's been teaching me how to salute for some reason. I think he saw it on YouTube. So it's bringing back some good memories. But I think, yeah, the hardest part was shedding that whole free core, if you want to call it, and being a civilian, to be quite honest, like not having to operate in such a hyper vigilant, hyper professional mindset at all times.
Having the professionalism, I think, is always usually a good thing in kind of more unfamiliar situations, but I think it definitely does put like a guard between yourself and other people from an interactions perspective. So I think learning to be able to kind of relax a little bit, I think makes yourself much more open to other people and other possibilities.